The problem with the growing neuroticism of the postmodern age is that it's making us easier to control and easier to manipulate for profit. This is a big problem of our time. During COVID-19, even though it quickly became apparent that COVID was not a serious threat to most people, it had a roughly 1.4% mortality rate, and most of that was in the elderly or sick. We understood this very early on, that most people were not at a significant risk, and there was at least a 98.6% chance of being okay. And yet, even with those odds, this safetyism of our age went into complete overdrive. There was this unnecessary panic. As you'd expect, and I hope the trench theory now explains why this is, the neuroticism was especially driven by people on the left who were freaking out, losing their minds, double masking in the car by themselves, looking to the government to keep them safe at all times, whereas conservatives were more likely to look at the data and say, hang on a second, what on earth are you freaking out about? The risk is tiny here, 98.6% survival rate. We're good. We can handle that. We can go about our lives. We don't want this government interference. Leave us alone. So risk tolerant, risk averse. You can see how these values always interconnect with one another. But because we're in the postmodern age, safetyism is the prevailing mindset and neuroticism ultimately won. The majority lost their minds, completely overestimated the danger. Now, these conservatives, though, annoyed the government, these pesky conservatives, because they weren't doing what they were told. They were not afraid enough for the government's liking. So the UK government responded to this obstinance by turning to their internal team of behavioural scientists called nudge units. I'm sure that a lot of people up until COVID-19 weren't even aware that these nudge units existed. But these nudge units were deliberately tasked with fear-mongering the public to make them more anxious. The message was make people more afraid, because if they're more afraid, they'll start doing what we tell them to. So they deliberately tried to wage a propaganda war on their own citizens, tried to spook them and stoke their fears to make them more pliable and compliant. And the basic theory around this is correct. Fear does make people easier to control and manipulate. If someone asks you to move 2 steps to your right, you might say no. But if someone says take 2 steps to your right, or a train coming around that corner any second's gonna kill you, then you'll move. If someone says send me $1,000, you might say nope, that's not gonna happen. But if they say send me $1,000 or your family's gonna be harmed, then you send them the $1,000. Fear motivates us in ways that few other emotions do. But here's the thing. We have to be aware that the powers that be and the governments of the world know this. They know that if they can keep us afraid, if they can convince us of some threat, we become more pliable and malleable and more biddable and open to being dictated to. So don't think that because COVID has gone, these nudge units don't exist anymore. Governments of the world still have their aims and are still trying to control and manipulate their populations by trying to keep them in a constant state of anxiety and fear. They're already pondering aloud how they might stoke fear around climate change, for example. Fear also makes it easier to manipulate you for profit, and media channels and news outlets have known about this for a long, long time. The legacy media discovered a long time ago that if you want to motivate people to watch your TV channel, there's no better way to do this than to prey on their fear. The saying emerged on news channels that if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, if you want that big viewership and the corresponding big ad revenue, you've got to lead with something alarming, something shocking, something sensationalistic to hook people in. News channels therefore gradually began to move away from merely reporting the news in accurate yet sometimes boring ways towards this alarmism. They began to run teasers ahead of the news, saying things like, what's in your tap water that you need to know about? Tune in at 6 for the answer. All of a sudden, people are freaking out that there's something killing them in their tap water, so they tune in. Viewing figures shoot up, and therefore ad revenue shoots up as well. Throughout the 1980s, this problem was really compounded with the emergence of 24-hour rolling news. I sometimes think this was perhaps one of the worst things to happen to Western society. It used to be the case that people would catch up on the daily news at some point in the evening, perhaps for maybe half an hour, maybe around 6 p.m, around dinner time, around 10 p.m. And then they turn off the TV and they continue on with their lives. They do something productive. With 24-hour rolling news, however, and the need to keep eyeballs on the screen around the clock, the scare stories began to be pumped out continuously, all day long, filling people's heads with fear all day long, often about things that aren't even scary. Every winter here in Scotland, it gets cold and most likely we get snow. It's called winter, it's a cold country, it happens every single year. It gets cold and we get some snow. Yet it doesn't get clicks if you call it just a normal winter. So look at how it's actually reported by the media. Look at these words and these themes. Frozen hell. The troll from Trondheim is attacking us, making out we're under threat from some kind of monster. Lethal, misery, brutal, blast. These are the words the media uses, and yet it's just winter. It happens every single year. Now, many of the things that the media tries to get us anxious about aren't even things that are actually happening anymore. They're only things that someone suggests could happen, may happen at some point in the future. It's all just fear-mongering speculation. It's now common to hear statements on the news like, an expert today has warned that in 20 years' time there may be no more bananas. Or you get a lot of this around climate alarmism. An expert has said today that by the end of the century, the planet may have exploded in a ball of lava. Now, in truth, these catastrophic predictions that you hear about on the news from day to day never come to pass. I refer you back to COVID, where none of the catastrophic predictions that the experts made on a daily basis came even remotely true. But it doesn't matter because it's not primarily their job to be true, it's their job to be scary. If it scares you, it makes it easier for the government to control your behavior. And the media doesn't care that it's been feeding you all of these untruths because at the end of the day, you clicked, you watched, and they made their money, which is all that they really care about. Indeed, the media doesn't really exist to report the news anymore. It exists to make money for those who are in the news business, which is a very different thing. And it does that through clicks primarily and through getting eyeballs on the screen. And it does that primarily by keeping you alarmed and anxious and afraid. I often look at my generation now with a sense of detached bemusement at how easily we fly into a panic and how easily we're manipulated in this regard. A couple of generations back, our ancestors had bombs landing on their heads every single night during the Blitz. And their famous response to that was simply, keep calm and carry on. You've got bombs landing on your head, keep calm, carry on. Now, interestingly, this generation has tried to reclaim that phrase. That's received a resurgence of interest in recent times. But nothing could be further from the truth for this generation. We're not stoic, we're not brave like that, we are fragile. We fly into a panic at the merest hint of something going wrong. I remember last year around Christmas time, the media decided to stir people up saying there would be a shortage of turkeys. So everyone was rushing around trying to find poultry, fighting with one another in the aisles over the last turkey. I also remember last year there was a scare story that one petrol station had run out of petrol, and then fearing a national shortage, the entire country flew into a blind panic and started fighting with one another to fill up their tanks on the forecourts. Why are we so neurotic these days? Why are we so easily spooked? Why are we so easily manipulated? Remember during COVID as well, everyone fighting for toilet roll. Why are we allowing ourselves to be so easily controlled and manipulated? Are we not aware of what they're doing and how this benefits the powers that be, the government, and how it benefits the media as well, how they're profiting off of our fear and anxiety? There are clearly important things in the world worth knowing about and engaging with, but there's also a great deal of noise in the media that has absolutely no positive impact on our lives at all, and which exists only to keep us afraid. And I would say we can all strike a blow at this system, at this fear economy, by not being sucked into it. I'm not suggesting that we ignore the real problems or bury our heads in the sand, far from it. And there are indeed very real issues that we must confront, especially in this postmodern age. But at the same time, let's all at least be aware of what they're trying to do. And let's not reward it. Don't let fear allow the government to control you or the media to profit from you. Refuse to live your life in this fear and anxiety. And let's get back to a little bit of that good old manly stoicism and courageous faith that we used to know, or at least our grandparents used to know. We'll all feel a lot better for that in the long run.